Hi and welcome to another Mailbox. This is something I do each week to go over some of the comments that appear from viewers, usually from YouTube, but it can include patrons as well as on Twitter or anywhere else. Some of those comments, I generally get to read most comments. I don't get to respond to all of them, but some of the comments require or worth more discussion, shall we say. So I tend to pick round about 10 of them and go through them each week, each Sunday. So the first one is about Simcraft. So I did a video on deciding which combination of tier and legendaries largely to use using Simcraft. Now, of course, there are options other than Simcraft now, but one of them that, I said in the video itself, if you want to use raid bots, then use raid bots by all means. I sort of find that once you're okay with Simcraft for at least doing this job, I think it's quicker. It's just really quick and easy to do. Like when you looked at that video that I did, it was a 12-minute video. That was me actually doing it. It doesn't take 12 minutes to do all that. A lot of that time was me spent discussing stuff, but also transferring between one program and another, because Simcraft, I'll tell you what, Simcraft does not easily record. I have to do a lot of fiddling about. So the actual process where and this is something I sort of do each week or every couple of weeks, depending on what upgrades I get that week. This is, or of course, if a new build of Simcraft comes out, this is something that takes me a few minutes to narrow it down. Now, there were a few people suggesting Simcraft here because they saw it this way, that I was doing one sim at a time. Simcraft is something that you can use to do multiple sets of gear at once. You can also do that on raid bots, but you need to be a patron at a certain level to be able to do a decent number of them. So I generally wouldn't advise raid bots for doing multiple sets. But the thing with Simcraft, okay, but the issue with this is we don't want to do lots and lots of sets. If you noticed when I was doing that video and I was doing it bit by bit, what was happening is I did a set of gear, then I did another set of gear, and then I used that information to further decide which next set of gear to do. Whereas if you use Simcraft, you're doing lots, you'll have to do loads and loads of different sets. The technique I was using is a mathematical technique called trial and improvement. And it is, you try a thing in something where there's so many solutions, it will take you ages to go through them all. So you try a thing and then you look at that information, then you try something else and you see if you get closer. If you don't get closer, you move the other way. If you do get closer, you keep going that way. And as I say, you cannot possibly do that with Simcraft. Now, if people want to use Simcraft for this, then that's fine. But it really doesn't save you any time, so that's why I didn't advise it. However, Simcraft is good for other things as well, and I am going to be doing a video on that, hopefully in the next week. I always say hopefully with these sort of things, because I have these list of things to do, and then something might come up and I have to do a video on that instead. Or my PC might decide to muck about again, it's really Windows rather than the PC. But anyway, that's my response to that one. The next one, again, it's to do with raid bots here, so I'm sort of following on for the same sort of thing here. Person says, this is one task that I really do love raid bots for. It's a simple checkbox for each item. I want it and can hash the best set out. I'd really love for the actual Simulation Craft desktop client to offer a scripted comparison like that. I think, as I understand it, the Simulation Craft is a mathematical model developed and put with information put in by the top level theory crafters for each class and spec. And they're giving up their time to do it. There are no financial rewards for doing so either. That's why you don't get lots of adverts all over. I mean, you download Simcraft for a start. It's a PC-based client rather than the web-based clients, Raidbots, because Raidbots is run on a financial setting. It has to fund itself, so that's why it's sort of web-based, and it's also why there's different levels of patron, which is fine. But that's what you need to get someone to develop that, because that's what Raidbots is. It uses Simulation Craft. It does a really good job. It is what Ask Mr. Robot should have done. Ask Mr. Robot, the simulator, was a stunningly great idea. I was invited into the beta for that to try it out about a year and a half ago. And I was so stoked for this. It was a marvellous idea. So user-friendly and also with brilliant customizable options, far better than Raidbots 2 has sort of become in terms of what in theory it could do. The problem is that if it's not accurate, then you might as well pull things out of a hat, is what I was saying. You might as well write down things on a hand, pull them out. Because Raid, ask Mr. Robot, and I've got a lot of applause for the people who do that, but it's a few people. Okay, they really needed to be using the expertise of the best theory crafters in the world on these things, and that's what Raidbots 2 has done, because it takes simulation craft and it puts on a nice friendly interface over it. But I think that's why you don't have it on the actual simulation craft. That's why it's a bare bones system in many ways, because the people working on it are giving up their time, and they just want something that can accurately model. It's up to the rest of the community to what to do with it, I think. Next one. Okay, this is a good one. Yeah, someone responding here. Yeah, devs, we didn't like the reforging system because it required people to use programs like Ask Mr. Robot to figure out the best option, so we're removing it. And they did sort of say that. That was one of the main reasons why they said they removed reforging in the end. And then, as they've noted here in Legion, yeah, let's add a ton of Titan forging, legendaries, and make tier sets have 6 pieces, because that's where, of course, they had to make them have 6 pieces, because that's way less complicated than reforging it. And this is true. This is why I've sort of now done that video, because I get asked so much, because it's one thing to be asked what in theory are 4 best tier pieces, but it's not just a case of that, is it? It's a case of what, especially at the moment, what are our 4 best tier pieces in combination with the 2 best tier pieces from the other set? Because it might well be like the 4 tier 20 pieces I'm using are not in theory the 4 best tier 20 pieces. It's just that combination along with the tier 19, along with my legendaries, is the best overall package. That makes it much more complicated than reforging ever was. If I had to do a video on reforging, do you know what? It lasts 2 minutes. It would say there was an add-on you could even use for it. It would be used that add-on. So I think this is true. Blizzard still have some objection to bringing reforging back, and they may well have a good reason for that. But yeah, I think this person's right. I don't think the actual reason is because people had to go and use an external program to see what to reforge, because the bottom line is people have to do that now, or will need to do that if they want to not go down the wrong way. Because Blizzard, as I say, I feel sorry for more casual players, because Blizzard have said after their changes to things partway through Legion, 10 item levels is almost always a definite upgrade. Well, I have several pieces, not just 1 or 2, several pieces in my bag that are more than 20 item levels upgrade on pieces I'm wearing, and they're not an upgrade. I keep them because they may be in the future. You always keep them. Always keep good pieces, because you never know what changes are going to come. But yeah, that's poor. And reforging would help that, and I really don't know why Blizzard are sticking to their guns on it. Next one, this is for trinket buyers. So I was saying that I have multiple unused trinkets. I have 3 unused trinkets from Tomb of Sargeras, and sometimes I use one combination, sometimes another. And sometimes I forget to. I have 2 keybinds for unused trinkets. I generally only have 1, shift and 4, but I also have shift and 2 available as well, in case I have. Generally, you wouldn't use 2 unused trinkets because you can't use them both at the same time anyway. But there's a particular combination that's actually okay for res. So I had the second. But sometimes I'll equip a trinket and then forget to drag it onto my action bar. Then at the start of the fight it doesn't work, so then I have to open my bags up and oh my god. After Crusade, of course, because I don't want to lose too much damage. And someone has suggested here, for trinket binds, do you not use the use 13 and use 14 to activate your first and second trinket slot? And of course, in theory, you could indeed do that. Actually, arguably, I could do that now. It would make sense for me to do that now, because what that will mean is it will just use whatever trinket is in that slot. The problem is that if I have 2 unused trinkets and I'm equipping them, there's no guarantee I'm going to equip them in the same place I thought they were on the macro. And I don't want shift and 2 to be my Spectre of Betrayal one fight, and then it to be shift and 4 the other one, or something like that. So it's messy either way if you've got more than 1 unused trinket. However, if you do have 1 unused trinket and you always keep it in the same place, you still have to remember to put it in the right slot, though. That's the problem with it. But in theory, yes, this is a good solution. But the reason I don't use it is because it could easily end up in the wrong slot. Next one, it says, this is quite timely. I honestly don't think Blizzard have any focus on brand new WoW players at the moment. There was a comment recently, says, I think from Ion, I don't remember hearing this one, but, you know, take your word for it, saying that everyone has heard of WoW by now and that basically anyone who has wanted to try WoW has tried it by now. Now, first of all, that would be a really silly thing to say. If you said that, that's really silly, because there's new players, you know, you get older. Like, you know, at 5 years old, WoW might not be the best game for you. Once you're 15, 10 years later, maybe you want to try it out. So that, you know, if someone from Blizzard has said that, that'd be a really daft thing to say. And the person goes on to say, I think it's a bit sad, but they are simply focused on retention and re-engaging lost subscribers. Hence why there is so much fan service type lore moments in WoD and Legion, possibly. You do certainly get that impression. I mean, I've just done a video, I've just uploaded it right now, on the leveling experience and what I think could be done about it. It's not completely fleshed out in the video. I have thought about it at length, but I realised that if I was to fully flesh it out in a video, it would be a very long video. But you can clearly sort of say, even without Blizzard saying anything, it's quite obvious they're not chasing new players. They're not actively chasing them because it's such an unfriendly game for the new player. I mean, I can't compare. I can't look at WoW through a new player's eyes because I'm not a new player to it. You know, I've played in every expansion. I took a significant break, but it wasn't a whole expansion. It's 2 halves of an expansion, really. But nonetheless, I've played in every expansion. So each expansion that comes along, I have to get to grips with a few changes to the game, but not the whole game as itself. But I can imagine, because, you know, I played Elder Scrolls Online, for example, when it first came out and then left it for a while. It's a completely changed game now. So it's like I'm a new player going back to that. Lord of the Rings Online, I played some years ago, and I'm going to play a little bit more this summer. Again, I'm a new player for that as well. So I can see what it is about MMOs that are problematic for new players and what are good for new players, what really help you into that. And you can look at WoW and you can see some things are good and some things are very, very bad. So, yeah, I can certainly believe that they're not chasing new players because there's no effort put into it at all. But I do think they should, because apart from anything else, you will always lose players. If your objective is just to keep what you've got, you'll always lose some. So you're on a downward slope, automatically on a downward slope. And what sort of business model works on the assumption that you're going to lose customers? Every sensible business model surely works on the idea that you want to bring new players in. Now, although I can understand the overall Blizzard policy will be, well, we bring other players into other games, well, there should be individual ones for each individual game as well, I feel. But yeah, I have just done a video on some of my thoughts on that one. Next one, this was about the Black Temple time walking. Some people had a very positive experience, some not so positive. There were a couple that weren't very positive. One of them, guilds refusing to grant roles on gear to pugs and no LFG meant 90% of people couldn't do Black Temple time walking if they did and got all the gear ninja looted from them. For a start, there shouldn't be any ninja looting. What you always... this is just general for pugs. I'm no expert on pugs, by the way. I basically don't do them. But one thing you should always do is make sure you get, not over Discord or anything like that, in text, in raid text, an explanation of how the gear is to be distributed. Okay, then there's a record that Blizzard can chase up. Now, if any loot is distributed not in line with what was stated, you can then issue a ticket. You'll never get the gear, by the way, if you were supposed to get it, but you'll at least stop someone else nicking it. So you put in a ticket, Blizzard will look it up and say, oh yeah, that was basically ninja looted. They do, and they will take that item off your person. They won't give it to you because they can't easily tell who should have got it, because they also understand things are said on VoIP. But if it's stated clearly in there, and always get it stated clearly in there, can you just say in raid, what are the conditions for loot distribution? And if you're not happy with it, don't join. And if you're happy with it, and then later on you win a role and someone else gets it, then you can say, and actually say in raid as well. Don't say it over VoIP, say it in raid. That item should have gone to me. I rolled highest. Okay. Then there's a record. But like I said, you don't get it. It's not like Blizzard pass it to you. But they do take it off the person who got it over you. so you can at least stuff them over. But hopefully that's a very negative thing. I think ninja looting has become less of an issue recently, especially since they took master looting off unless you're in a guild group. And I know a guild group doesn't have to be a full guild group, but it has to be almost a full guild group. And the other thing I would suggest is be very, very cautious about joining any pug that has enough guild members in it to be able to use master looter, because they will inevitably want to give that gear to members of their own raid group. So make sure it's at least of a reputable guild. Otherwise, just join a straight-up pug, a proper pug, where master looting isn't even an option. That's the best advice I would give for that. But I don't see this as... I think Blizzard have done some serious work. I'm not saying there's not other things they could do instead, but I do think that they have improved things for puggers. But that's as someone who doesn't pug, so my opinion is fairly invalid, really, I suppose. Next one, I want to pick on. This was to do with the Tomb of Sargeras. I've done a series of Tomb of Sargeras heroic guides. I've done 3 for each of the bosses at groups of 3. So the part 1 was the first 3 bosses, then there was the middle 3 bosses, then the last 3 bosses. The last 3 bosses, I think, hopefully you'll sort of see improved as well. The last 3 bosses took me a long time to do that last one, partly because I should have actually broken it into 2 shorter videos. Completely failed to understand how long it would take me to do Kill Jaden, because it seemed to me such a simplistic boss in heroic, but in actual fact there are quite a lot of mechanics you need to be aware of, because the point of these guides, it wasn't to tell you about all the mechanics. You look at Fat Boss, for example. Fat Boss produced really good guides, but they're guides for raid leaders. Obviously the other raiders should watch it as well. But I look at those as essentially guides for raid leaders, the people who are going to lead that raid and decide the strategy. What I wanted to do, I don't want to duplicate someone else's work, especially when they're going to bring it out before I ever can anyway. What's the point of duplicating someone's work and bringing it out after them? That's just stupid. So I try and focus when I do these sort of videos on what do you as the individual need to know. Because there's other things that are sort of going on. But if you don't need to know about them, don't worry about it. What do you need to know, and how are you going to deal with it? So that's what these were about. But there's one thing in here. Let's have a look. Where we've said, reading the journal often does not help me to understand what a particular boss may be doing. Now, this is really crucial. I was saying this myself at the start. Like, in WoD, I did PTR on all the raid bosses. And so when we came to doing them live, I felt much more comfortable, because I'd experienced the room and the mechanics. And although there'd been changes made, there's always changes between alpha, beta, or PTR, whatever, to live. The general boss and the feel of it, and the feel of the room, and how much damage certain things do was largely the same. But in Legion that hasn't happened. I haven't PTR tested any raid bosses. So I've gone in completely cold. And although I've read up on them, I've read things in the Dungeon Journal, and I've even read guides that Fat Boss produced, like text-based, before they came live. I get these abilities mixed up in my head. Like, sometimes I'll be talking about a particular ability, and someone will point out, no, that's on that boss instead. It's like, oh, is it? Because you read 9 bosses worth of guides and Dungeon Journal abilities and stuff, and they'll just get mixed up in your head because you've not seen them, you've not experienced them. So this is a really crucial point, and again, I do have this in mind when I'm doing them as well, that it's not enough. Yeah, the journal is actually more useful after you've experienced it. So it's like you do the fight, then you read the journal and go, oh yeah, okay, so that's what sometimes I've been streaming progress recently, and if you've been watching that, you may notice that every now and then I open my spellbook and have a look at something, because I'm now thinking, because I thought it worked one way, maybe it doesn't, so I'm just checking certain things out as I do it, because it sticks in your mind a lot better now. Next one, this is about rogues. I was talking about the fact it's really hard, nay, impossible, to find decent rogues these days. Now, subtlety, of course, although it's getting a bit of a nerf next week, subtlety has been top of the tree, but even assassination has done well, because what you bring rogues for, and this has always been the case, is their stunning utility. This is why on a boss where you don't want melee, on very melee unfriendly bosses, and there's not that many of them, but they're usually fairly crucial bosses, you can still take plenty of rogues. Whenever I think of a melee unfriendly boss, What I mean is it's unfriendly to all melee apart from rogues, because rogues sort of get away with it. What someone said here is, to be honest, I think the reason why you don't see a lot of decent rogues is because everyone sees sub as PvP, and it's hard to find a worthwhile sub PvE guide to learn from. This is possibly true as well. Someone has responded there saying this, even the rogue Discord isn't very helpful. Just capped yesterday and can hardly find anything useful. And it is difficult. Not all classes and specs do have effective guides. And the other problem is, of course, you can look at some guides and try and follow them, but how do you know that they're actually credible? That's another difficulty. So even when you come across a guide, how do you know it's correct? Because there's plenty of people put stuff out that's just plain wrong. Noxic is really famous for this. But the problem is, see, Noxic is still going. And I say everyone, obviously not everyone. A lot of more serious players now know that Noxic is a byword for, well, toxic, really. Toxic guides, because they're terrible. They're dreadful. And yet, they obviously sucker enough people into them because... And every now and then you'll see someone saying, oh, I've been following the Noxic guide. It's like, no, don't do that. And there are other ones as well. And sometimes you get a guide that's just copied off someone else, but they'll have got a few things wrong about it because they don't themselves understand it. They're just literally reading out someone else's. They ad-lib a few things because they think they understand it and don't, and get it wrong as well. So it is a difficult one. Someone here has suggested someone on YouTube. But again, I can't comment on whether they're suitable or not. But, you know, apparently Natal is quite good on YouTube. Next one, back to time walking. So again, someone else who's a little bit unhappy with it. What they've said is it was a bad event. The entire instance was bugged and not ready. It says some talents, for example, the final standing prop pantry did not even work. Your artifact weapons didn't work either. I had one issue. Yeah, I had one issue where my Wake of Ashes, which is supposed to stun demons and undead, wasn't stunning. I'm not talking about the bosses, obviously. I mean trash. It wasn't stunning them. So there were a few things. But there's a couple of things here that the author of this post thinks are bugs that were not bugs. I don't think they are. It says here, I had Gorefiend attacking me as a rep paladin for the entire fight when our tank could not take aggro despite being a good tank. You have to bear in mind, Burning Crusade, threat worked completely different. I can well understand someone who is considered a good tank today not coping. I have to say, our tanks did not struggle at all, but they understood that the way the threat works is different because TBC threat worked differently. You can't just taunt someone and hit it like you can now and you've all of a sudden got threat. That's not how it worked. It's not how it worked. So what I strongly suspect here is your tank, who was not playing back in Burning Crusade, and of course why should they? Plenty of players didn't play back in Burning Crusade. Just was trying to tank it as if it's a Legion encounter, and it's not. It's a Burning Crusade encounter that has just, you know, that they've just brought back for us and scaled us down for. But other than that, they're the same fights. Obviously, then they're shadows of their former selves, because what you'll notice is, if you looked at your DPS numbers, they were way, way higher than you'd have done back then. You know, I was doing thousands of DPS on them. No chance. What? Black Temple? 1,000 if you were lucky. Maybe a little bit more, I suppose. It depends on when you're talking right at the start of it or right at the end of it. Because Black Temple itself covered a huge stretch. Black Temple came out fairly early on in Burning Crusade, relatively speaking. It came out before anyone had actually even finished the previous tiers raids and was out for obviously a long time after. So I suppose it depends on when you're talking about. But you certainly weren't doing the DPS we were, so we trivialised a lot of mechanics as well. But it was effectively that raid just scaled us down. The other thing they've said here, it says, then we leave Illidan as the last boss to kill him later, but guess what? The entire raid reset for no reason. No, it's not for no reason. It does that because it's a you know, the same thing happens on raids now. The same thing happens in Nighthold or Tomb of Sargeras or something like that. You know, you haven't got your lockout set. I'm not saying there wasn't a bug here, but you know, I've done Tomb of Sargeras heroic, for example, on Wednesday, this reset. If I were to go back into Tomb of Sargeras on heroic now, I would find it's repopulated because there's nothing to stop you killing them again. You're loot locked, But there's nothing to stop you going back in and killing them again. That's all that's happened. It's not mythic. They're not dead for the week. It's flex. It's like normal heroic thing. You know, the road just came back up. That's how it works. That's how flex works. So that's not a bug either. Next one. Curse you and your alternative pronunciations. Well, I thought of another one actually. Just talking about this when we're talking about sub-rogues. We say, this is a WoW example. We say sub-rogues. But we don't say sub-tulti rogues. Salty. The B's silent then, isn't it? Oh dear. So we shouldn't really say sub, should we? We should say sub. Anyway, little aside. Next one. I think this might be the last one, actually. No, it's not. No, it's not. Oh, stop that. Stop messing about. It says, I don't know. I see where both the very highest... This is to do with the limit ban again. This is rolling on and on and on. Where the very highest endgame guilds need to make a way to make money as they treat the game like a job, and Blizz likes that they do. But Blizz won't treat PvE the same as PvE in the e-game aspect. But doing stuff in-game for real money is completely against the terms of the game. Okay, so there's a few things I'll throw my sort of opinions on here. It says Blizz likes that they do. I'm not convinced they do. I'm not convinced that Blizzard likes the idea that people completely no-life the game to do like these superhuman things. I think Blizzard would prefer it if everyone just played it on a much more casual basis, based on sort of things they've said before. They, for example, have bemoaned the fact that people understand the mechanics of the game. Because as they've said themselves, it makes it a lot more difficult to tune when everyone sort of know how the game works. And someone can say definitively, this is the best, this is the fact that min-maxing is a thing is not good for the developers. So I'm not sure they are happy about it. Then comes the thing about, okay, Blizzard won't treat PvE the same as PvE in the e-game aspect. No, they won't. And I don't think they should either. I know they've done this invitational thing for Mythic Plus dungeons, where in theory there's some prize money. But I don't see PvE as being a real good prospect for esport and therefore commercial purposes. I think where the main chagrin comes with this is limit have been banned. Now, there's two things here. One is... Because you ask yourself, why were Limit banned and not other guilds? Because other guilds have done the same thing that they've been banned for. There's a couple of things here. One of them I talked about on my stream. One is the fact that they just did it blatantly. They didn't even hide the fact that they were doing it. Now, it could be argued that Blizzard are not actually hugely bothered about this going on, as long as it's not been done on a grand scale. Now, a few guilds going for World First is not exactly a grand scale. So maybe they are just willing to turn a blind eye. But Limit make it impossible because they publicly announce the fact that they're doing it. It's not possible to just pretend it's not happening. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is where you come into favoritism. Now, what I would look at here is that Limit, and I talked about this in my stream, as I say, Limit are an American guild. Whereas the other guilds going for the world first are not. And several of them, including Method, are based in Europe. Where I just wonder if the reason they turn a blind eye to it is because if they were to pursue it and ban Method for doing this, they might conceivably find themselves in breach of EU law. Because games have done this before. Games, I think I talked about this last Sunday, ironically, it's just come up again. Getting deja vu all of a sudden. But some games' terms of service, when it's put to the test, are not compliant with European law. And sometimes developers have been taken to court and the European court said, that's not happening. So it's possible that there's a deliberate blind eye to what Method do. Because on the one hand, they're not making a big fuss of it. They're doing it on the sly. Everyone knows they're doing it, but it's on the sly. And the fact that maybe they wouldn't like this to be tested in court. That's just an idea. I don't know that that's true. And the final one, it says, again, quite timely, what are your thoughts on making all of WoW up to the current expansion scale to your level? For example, I would go from level 45 to 50 or 75 to 75, doing the complete storyline in Elwyn Forest, blah, 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 blah. Ever since I've seen this done well, which was in Elder Scrolls Online, I have wanted this to come to World of Warcraft. In fact, it's quite funny. There's several things that you look at some modern MMOs and you think that is the way forward. That's the way to do it. Some things you can understand why WoW wouldn't do it. One thing is like action combat. So like World of Warcraft, for example, has targeting. You have to physically have a mob targeted to be able to then do damage to it. The reason that is historical, it's because when people's internet connections weren't very good, if you didn't have that situation, lag would mean that you had no reliable way of knowing who should get hit by what. Because you might fire something at someone and, you know, straight as a die, and on your screen it looks like it's hit them, but in reality they've actually moved by then, but you just don't see it because of lag. Nowadays, broadband is much more widespread, connections are much better. The game can more accurately decide whether or not someone should have been hit by something. So that's why in modern MMOs you can have this thing where you're not directly targeting someone, you're just aiming it, but aiming it normally. And you can do that. Now, I don't think that WoW should stop doing that, because that would be such a massive change. But one thing they should do, yes, is introduce scaling. Now, Elder Scrolls Online, I was suggesting a compromise where you can level wherever you like. All the zones are scaled up to the start of the current expansion's worth of leveling. So it's like you can level in any old content zones from level 1 to 100, wherever you like. But then when you get to 100, the scaling on those zones stops, and then you're sort of forced to get decent experience to do the newer zones. That's a decent compromise. Like Elder Scrolls Online, you just do what you want, when you want. It really doesn't care. It doesn't say, oh, well, this is the latest zone, so we want you to get the latest bit of experience from it. They don't care. Do what you want. They'll keep putting new zones in. They'll keep putting new content in. Do it when you like. Do it straight away. Like Morrowind's just come out, so there's some new zones for that. You can go straight there on a new character now. Straight to that if you want. Or you can not. It's up to you. So that, and you can go away and come back and all the rest of it. So I absolutely think that should be in. No question about it. That would make it a lot better. Massively better as well. My concern is that it would make it so... I think quite a lot of decisions that are made by... When we talk about Blizzard, often it's the developers that are in our firing line, but sometimes it's not their fault. I think there are too many things that are baffling about World of Warcraft. It's like, well, why don't they make that change? And I think the reason for a lot of it is money. Think of any paid service. So we had paid services for faction changes and realm changes. Is this why we still have realms? Because realms are, again, a historical thing. We don't need them anymore. The technology is such that they are not necessary. So why do we have them? People pay to move. And the same thing could be said of, this level scaling, because character boosts are a thing. Like, for example, I'll be honest, I'm going to be doing a series on, like, a beginner series. I'm going to be leveling a priest on my current realm. I have a priest that I could bring over from another realm and just level that up for the new zones. But I was thinking I'll do a series this summer. But I'll be on, when I get to level 60, I'm very likely to just pay for the character boost and get it back all the way up rather than do the full leveling thing. And there's enough people will do that. And it's not cheap, but there's enough people who think, do you know what, bugger it. I'll just pay for that to be done. So I'm not sure that they would do it. They'll probably come out with some reason about, oh, it'll take a lot of development time, which it will, I think. But I think if it weren't for the money side of it, they would consider that worthwhile. It's one of those things. I think the Blizzard development team would quite like to do that. But I strongly suspect the money people say, are we going to lose some money out of this? Now, I could argue if they really shaped up, and that's what my earlier video was about, the beginner experience, I reckon they could make more money from newer subscribers. But that's just theory. I'm just making that up. I don't know that. I've got no market research to back that statement up. I think the bottom line will come. We get so much money from people paying for character boosts, and I don't know how much that is. So we don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardise that revenue stream. But anyway, so those are sort of my thoughts on some of your questions. Keep the comments coming in, and I'll do these each week. Hope you've enjoyed it. Until next time, I'll see you later.